Welcome back to episode 2, Laying the Groundwork. Ryan, what does that mean exactly? Because we don't do new builds.
That's right. So new construction and conversions, those are two totally separate beasts. New construction, you have to literally do groundwork, grading, get the whole site prepped for your slab. And
Bring all the
typically,
utilities in, yeah.
there's a ton of literal groundwork. With conversions, it's drastically different. We do hardly any physical, actual groundwork or bring in utilities. I mean, of course, there's exceptions to the rule, but the parking lot's already there, the structure's there, the foundation's there. Typically, all the utilities that we need are there. Sometimes we do have to bring in like fire sprinkler lines, or we have to change out our domestic water to have a backflow preventer because those are new requirements. But really, mostly everything is there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, how are we finding these amazing sites that are already existing? We're like, okay, this can work for what we're trying to do. This conversions. Okay, everything's already there. We have this shell of a building.
Mm-hmm.
What makes that building so special to us?
Yeah, so what happens very first is the acquisition team, which we have really nothing to do with.
Nothing.
They find the buildings. And so when they find the buildings, they put it under underwriting, which they check a 3-mile radius, a 5-mile radius, a 7-mile radius, all these things that really we know very little about. We're busy doing our side, which is the construction side. So they specialize in that, and we specialize in construction. So they find the building, and they underwrite it, and they say, hey, this might be a good deal. Then they bring us on board. Yeah. So when we go to look at the project, we're mostly looking at the actual conversion itself. How easy or how difficult will this be to convert? Yeah. Usually, acquisitions brings us the stuff that's hard to convert because that's why nobody else has done it. But the hard conversions, usually there's that value add product in there, and that's how we force equity in the project. Again, all these metrics, acquisitions is underwriting them, but we have to just basically put numbers to these things. It needs a new roof. Okay, how much is that going to cost? It needs, a foundation repair. How much is that going to cost? A new loading dock. How much is that going to cost? Yeah. So we really do the costs as far as feasibility, how hard is it going to be to convert this thing, and what is that going to take as far as the budget is concerned.
It's pretty much the ugly duckling, and they're like, hey, construction, let's see what you can do with this duckling. What are the pitfalls here? What are we not seeing that could make this deal make or break it, pretty much?
Yeah, and I guess one part that's unique with us, like if you were a general contractor and someone says, do you want to do this project? You're always going to always say, yeah, because if we're a general contractor and that's all we do, we want to make the profit off the job, right? Yeah. However, with Nomad Capital, since that's our company as well, we're kind of paying attention like, hey, this might not be a good deal.
This might cost a lot more.
Yeah. So, like Flowery Branch is a perfect example where it was like, everybody's excited to do it. And we on the construction side we were extremely excited. We thought this building was going to be great.
Yeah.
But once we did our due diligence on the construction side, acquisitions does their own due diligence. How saturated is the market? Are people moving in? Are they moving out of that town? We don't do that. What we do is we look at the building and say, what does the structure look like? Can this support, 125 pounds per square foot load? We go with the engineering. We talk to the fire department, say, hey, what does this building need to be basically acceptable to be storage? So that's what happened in Flowery Branch. While the acquisition side was doing their underwriting, we were kind of doing our due diligence, and we were figuring out what is it going to cost to make this building, approved to be, used as self-storage. And that's when we were looking out for Nomad. Hey, just as an FYI, we thought this building was going to cost X amount of dollars to convert. Well, now we have these 2 line items that were $400,000 each. So it basically brought the budget way up, and we notified them. Instead of saying, oh, we want to do this job, we're going to make all this money on profit, we're like, hey, as an FYI, this is going to cost a lot more. You guys should really underwrite this for a second time and understand what these numbers are going to do to the payouts and all the investments and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say during that process, it's more challenging when we go to the acquisitions, when we go to the first site walk, our meeting, where construction's being brought in. I think that's a little bit more difficult because we're finding local trades usually. I mean, obviously, we have some trades that we like to keep moving from job site to job site, so we ask them to come along to the site visit. But also, we're finding new trades in the local area to support it. And then we're pretty much like, hey, can you please come here? We plan on doing this project. We're not 100% sure yet. That, to me, is one of the hardest things because it's like, hey, it's crucial for us to get the numbers.
Yeah.
But to them, they're like, they don't even know if they're going to do this project yet. So that is what I feel like is one of the hardest things, because I know with Florence, we're like, hey, we need this fire sprinkler quote. We know like 90% we're not going to do it, right?
Yeah.
Talking to the township and the TRC and the DRC, but we still just want to get that rough number just in case, worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Because that's the way we like to plan. Like worst case scenario, what can happen? How do you feel about that? Is that something that you find is one of the harder steps, or is one of the easier steps?
That is definitely one of the harder ones. I mean, if we're talking about laying the groundwork, that's like our groundwork is basically formulating a very in-depth budget and finding out all the risks that are associated with it. Because when you have new construction, basically it's all engineered for you. You get a big plan set and you build that. Well, our groundwork is doing, like, are we grandfathered in for anything?
Yeah.
Like, of course, if we're grandfathered in, we're not going to overbuild something if we don't need to. So that's part of the groundwork. And like you were talking about, finding the subs to figure that out. Like a lot of the local subs know these grandfather rules and all that kind of stuff, and they could sway us in the right direction. So they don't always love to come out and do these site visits because they don't know us. They haven't done business with us. But that's why we rely on local subs and our core subs as well that travel with us. Our core subs, the guys that travel with us, are more willing to do these site visits because, we're doing 4, 5, 7 projects a year. Yeah. They understand it's a numbers game, but the local guys, it's a little bit harder, but the easy lift for them is that they're local. Sometimes they just happen to be driving by and we wave them down and say, hey, come take a look. But that site visit, when we send out like 40 invites, I know we're only going to get about like 8 responses. Yeah. It's difficult, but I think that's why we work so hard on building relationships. We're just out here to build great relationships so that we can do these things and get people to actually show up when we need them to.
Yeah, and we find great vendors in the process. We hopefully find some out of Florence and then bring them on to the next one, because they have to be licensed in South Carolina, which is always fun things to find out. But also with that great site visit, we usually talk to the township or the AHJ.
AHJ, authorities having jurisdiction.
I love saying that.
Yes.
It is AHJ out.
Yes.
And a part of that is we go there prepped with a list of questions. Like,
yes.
Hey, boom, this is what we've learned. That list is always grown because we're finding new things as we go to different townships, like adding to the list. Let's make sure we knock out those. I enjoy those meetings because we gain a lot of knowledge about what we're going to do. Yeah. Are there any pitfalls to these meetings?
Yeah. So like you said, the list is always growing, but like you can't bring out a laptop and start interviewing these people with 40 questions, right? Like we try to merge certain questions and try to kind of consolidate so that they're more willing to help us. Like they don't love just being quizzed about a project that they don't even know about. So you have to make these questions more general. And AHJ is a perfect thing. It's like, well, that's authorities having jurisdiction. Who's the authority that has jurisdiction on this building? Like that's one of the first things you have to find out. Yeah. Sometimes the fire marshal has subdivisions, and you got to find out exactly which subdivision, find out who's going to be looking at your project and go talk to those people. So that is also a big part of laying the groundwork, figuring out which jurisdiction has authority on your building, going and following up with them and doing it in a polite and smooth manner. You don't want to be rigid and just ask them a bunch of questions and you're going to get shut down, because sometimes if you ask them so many questions, they're going to just be like, you know what, submit your plans. And then you kind of just shot yourself in the foot, because now you just have to design your plans on, well, whatever the book is, literally what the code book is, which is thousands of pages long. Oh, so you kind of want to be smooth about it and navigate those waters so that you get the questions answered that you need and kind of submit a plan set that you feel comfortable with and kind of reduce the amount of comments you get back. It's a whole game. Yeah. It's very challenging.
It is. Some of these jurisdictions, very minimal comments. I would say Lexington was probably one of our easier ones.
My favorite, yes.
Yeah, right? Just like minimal comments back.
There was one comment, Cameron.
One comment. It said, good job, guys.
Yeah. It said, coordinate your electrical utilities with this guy, Chris Jones or something like that, and then his phone number. That was it.
Yeah.
That was it.
All of them can't be that easy.
No.
And in fact, they aren't. At Kernersville, how many comments do they have?
Cameron, I am still licking my wounds on this one. I mean, it would like probably. I took a screenshot of him. I think it was 200 something comments, and it was like 4 or 5 different packets. So there was different review committees that were submitting packets of comments.
Yeah.
Some as crazy as what is the diameter of the existing trees?
Wow.
So we had to go find out the diameter of the existing trees to get tree credits towards our current trees, and then do a whole tree equation with a tree table called a vegetation plan. Basically, I totally understand. They want the buildings to look nice.
Yep.
They don't want developers to come in and just slap something up that looks out of place. But sometimes it gets really into the nitty-gritty, and we have to do tree credits and bushes and all this kind of stuff, so that basically there's literally people's jobs to count the trees and make sure that you planted as many trees as they wanted you to plant. So it's difficult, but like if it's that difficult, some people will throw up their hands and not want to do it. And that's kind of like what we do. It's like we jump those hurdles because other people won't. Like we make time to jump these hurdles. Yes, it's difficult, but if it was easy, everybody would do it.
That's true.
So that's the kind of thing you run into sometimes. And unfortunately, you don't really know until you submitted your plans and start actually going through the permitting process. And that's what happened at Kernersville. We had a TRC meeting. They said, oh, just don't paint your building pink and we'll be good to go. Well, that was not true. I mean, they can only tell you so much because you're just coming up with an idea. You're saying, hey, I'm going to do this with this building. And they're like, yeah, like it should be okay. Well, there's just a lot of steps that they neglected to tell us about.
Yeah, I could see that. And then the fact that depending on what you get back, it depends on how long their response is to what your overall correction is, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it is just eating up a lot of time. Some of these municipalities just going back and forth and trying to communicate to them directly, and then all these other messages that you're trying to because it can be daunting. How long did you spend on permitting?
Yeah, and just to touch on that, like when they send us a comment back, like, "Hey, you need to add 7 trees here." I can't do that. I'm not a licensed landscaped architect or a civil engineer. So like I literally am not allowed to go on the plan set and change it. Like I have to take these comments and then bring it to somebody else, have them do it, get those plans and bring them back, and then submit them back to the city. So it's like there's this whole telephone game that's like I still have to navigate all that.
That's what I was just about to say. It's a telephone.
Yeah.
You got to let everyone else know, like, hey, this is what they said.
Yeah.
And then you get it back, and you're like, I'm not sure if you got what their answers are.
Yeah. And then, like, yes, I can add the civil engineer to the portal, and they can see these comments. But, our civil engineers are third parties, right? And so they are doing the best that they can. Yeah. But they're not always as detail-oriented. So I did put him on the portal, and he was seeing these comments. But then I had to download all the comments, put my 2 cents in, like, hey, we're going to do this fence in this kind of area with these kind of vinyl slats and all this kind of stuff. And then then I'd send it to him with literally 70 or 80 other comments with my take on them. And then he would submit them back to me, and I'll be like, hey, you missed the fence with the vinyl slats. So I send it back to him. Then I get it back, and I'm like, the detail is too blurry. Yeah. Like, nobody can read this. Send it back to him. Get it back. It's like, hey, you missed the sidewalk detail also. Boom, 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 boom. When there's 80 comments, it's so difficult. Even if you're as detailed as possible, you number them down. It's just like people are just moving very fast. Yeah. And, that's kind of our job to be the facilitator and be like, hey, this has to be perfect in order to send it back over. So that's where the time is. And then not only that, when you submit it, they have certain review periods. You have to submit it by the 5th for them to review it by the 30th. If you miss the 5th, well, then it's going to be the next 30th, of the month. So, I mean, it's just... some jurisdictions are a lot
challenging, to say the least.
Yeah, but when you have a jurisdiction that is growing at that capacity, that's what happens. Their review times are longer because there's so much growth happening. Yep. They're used to being a small town. Well, now they're growing. They're becoming a medium to a large size town. Well, that's kind of what we're going for. The smaller towns that are becoming, heavily populated areas. The more people that's there, the more people that need climate controlled self-storage. So that's kind of like what we're dealing with, growing markets that have inundated systems, and we just have to navigate that.
Fun for us, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. keeps us busy.
All right. So these individuals, our team,
Mm-hmm.
the team that we bring in, our engineers and architects that we bring in, our third party, that communication is always easy, is a little bit challenging. I mean,
Yeah, some weeks are better than others.
Hey,
to be
that
honest,
is true.
like you said, they're third party. They have busy and slow seasons, just kind of like us. Our architect, we are his main client, so that is nice. We have a meeting every week with him, which has been phenomenal since we've kind of become his main client about 8 months ago. We kind of asked for that weekly meeting because there's so many projects going on that there's always something to talk about.
Yeah, always.
Obviously we're sending him emails pretty much every day throughout the week, but then it's just nice to have that recap meeting, kind of touch on each item. So I feel like the architect, we've got that one pretty nailed down, but we kind of use engineers so infrequently, maybe once or twice on a project, and our architect also has his own engineers, that it doesn't really make sense for us to have a weekly meeting with them when we're only really using them maybe 2 or 3 times throughout a project. So
that's another telephone situation, because we're talking to the architect is then now sending out to his engineers our comments to him.
That's right.
And it's just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take them a couple days to figure out what the architect's saying and then back to us. That process can get lengthy sometimes. We do a good job by having these weekly meetings and staying on top of it. But also, we kind of are looking at this architect as the individual that is going to be responsible for looking up the code, what regulations need to be done. Does this building meet all these requirements that the TRC, DRC is looking for?
That's right.
We
Yeah.
heavily rely on them.
Yeah. The architect is literally licensed to do all these kinds of things. We are not. We are licensed to build. They are licensed to design. Those are two very different things. And just like you were talking about, the architect works with the engineers kind of on our behalf. And especially when the engineer says, oh, you need an extra column right here. Well, then the architect needs to reflect that on all the drawings. And then they also have to look, is there any conflict with any doorways or anything like that? So it's a big coordination thing that as soon as you change one thing, it kind of spirals and changes everything. That's why changes are so detrimental to construction, but they're inevitable. And what I love about having Nomad on our team is that we can kind of really weigh the value of these changes and say, hey, do we really want to change this? Because it has a cascading effect.
Yeah.
And usually we pick the most simple, cost-effective, but yet functional ideas, and that's what I love about having pretty much everything in-house. Yeah.
It's a good thing to have in-house. The clients are right next door.
Yeah,
You just go talk to them.
exactly.
Hey, we have a meeting with them almost every week as well. Like,
Yeah.
hey, this is what you want to do. This is going to save us some money here. What do
Yeah.
you think? So that part is easy.
Yeah. I think another great thing about having the two companies in-house is we talk about get the feels for the area. After we do our site visit and we talk construction and engineering and all this kind of stuff, we do the not so scientifical thing of get the feels.
Yeah.
What would you like to explain what we consider get the feels?
I would say for everyone, I would say the feels are different, right? You're looking at what's coming in, what's in the area, what's growing.
Right.
My feels kind of come from the gut. What food is in the area that I'm going to like, that is going to be good for my supers, the people that are working on the job site. Is there a Starbucks? Is there a Chick-fil-A? These are what I think are pretty important, because that tells me, hey, those companies did the research to be in that market. I think we're kind of in a good market.
Yeah.
So that's really where my feels is, and I'm a big fan of Oriental food. So I'm like, is there a good spot for me to eat when I come down here and do some site visits?
Yeah. I mean,
what are your feels?
Mine aren't as specific as yours, clearly. I'm looking for McDonald's, Starbucks. I don't usually eat McDonald's, but I'm looking for those big names that are, institutional companies that have chosen that market.
Yeah,
right?
it's like Walmart. It's not going to build out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly.
They're going to do
They're
their
paying
own
attention.
research. And I'm like, hey, is this good for the market? Is it a growing industry? Is it a growing area?
Yeah, they have $1 million acquisition teams that are doing this research that, some companies' motto is just piggyback off where McDonald's is going.
That is true.
So that's what I'm looking out for, those big names. And then driving downtown, I love to see old buildings getting renovated and restored. We saw that in Gastonia, where the downtown was just coming to life. And you don't want to be too early, but you don't want to be too late. You kind of want to see that middle ground where it's starting to grow. And the funny thing is, again, we're the construction team, but yet you and I both personally, mentally, we are literally invested in
Correct.
El Fondo. So typically, a general contractor wouldn't care about the feels.
Yeah.
You know, but it's just nice to know that like our voice is heard when we like kind of take a look at these areas, because usually we're some of the first to go down there.
Yeah.
And our take on the market, we're not numbers guys as far as acquisitions, but we kind of take a look around and like, is this something that we would really want to invest in? You know, and I think that's really important, because a typical general contractor would just say like, oh yeah, this project's great. Yeah, I just want to get my 12%
Yeah, I'll take your money.
overhead and profit and walk with it. And it's like, there's much more collaboration, I think, with, you know, us doing what we do and how integrated we are than what you typically get.
Because really, like, get the feels involves pretty much everyone part of the project. So it involves construction, the owners of Nomad, and city storage. So the people that own the building, the people that are going to do the construction on the building, and the people that are going to manage the building. So everyone puts their input on what is going on and what the best way to pretty much make this a diamond.
Yeah, that's
I like
right.
it.
Yeah.
I like it. That seems like a smart tactic.
So after we get the feels, we lay the groundwork, we kind of do several site walks. What happens next, Cameron?
Well, everyone's got their feels, so then we do a CTJ, is what we call it in-house here.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's pretty much where every individual or every different department, you know, they come to a meeting and we go, all right, we just walked this building. You know, we got some quotes in. We know what our plan is. How's everyone feeling about it? You know, construction, how are you feeling about it? Your budget's this.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that budget? Are you strong? Acquisitions. This is what the budget is for construction.
Yeah.
You know, this is what the market is. You've been there recently.
Yeah.
You know, how are you feeling about city storage? How's that looking? You know, this is where everyone's trying to get on the same page as, hey, is this something we want to move forward? You know, and everyone there at the table kind of has a voice, you know, from construction to city storage to Nomad. Everyone's got a voice at the table. It can get heated, I would say. There's a temperature increase, you know, because some things, you know, us being construction, we're going to fight a little bit more for our side. Like, hey, this budget, you know, there's going to be some underlying things that could be there, that could not be there.
Yeah.
But, I mean, all in all together, you know, it's really a team effort, and, you know, everyone's voice is heard, and we come to a good reasoning before we make a decision as a team, really.
Yeah. I would say that there's always pros and cons.
Yeah.
Like you're never going to have all pros, right? So we're weighing pros and cons, and we're taking a look at the risks. That's where the debate happens, right?
Yeah.
Here's the risk. How did we underwrite, or what did we do to see what the mitigation was, right? Perfect example, Flowery Branch, you know, the risk was that we would have to install a fire sprinkler. That was a pretty much 99% risk.
Yeah.
We identified that originally, you know, they were saying that we wouldn't really have to do it, but by the time we got to our CTJ meeting, we identified that it was very, very likely that we'd have to do a fire sprinkler. So
You don't need it.
Yeah. So what happened is we got pricing to install fire sprinklers, and that's what happened. Is like we identified a risk and we said, this is the cost of this risk. Then we all had that meeting and said, well, acquisitions, what does this do to your budget?
Yep.
Oh, by the way, there's a second risk. It's the structural component. Here's the cost for that. What does that do to your underwriting? And after all that, in our CTJ meeting, we said, you know what? This is not going to pan out. There's other factors too, like oversaturation of the market, certain metrics at acquisition. So everybody's kind of talking this through. Founder, co-founder, the general partners, everybody's in that meeting looking at all these pros and cons and kind of weighing the risk. And we all walked out of that feeling good that we needed to walk away from that project. So, you know, the CTJ sometimes is as clear as day, and sometimes, you know, we even have CTJ part 2s where we identified something that's like, you know what, we need to investigate further.
Yeah, let's get some numbers on that.
Yeah. So it's a meeting of the minds, really, to you know, before we pull that trigger, that makes sure that basically all 3 parts of the company are totally aligned.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Well, I think that wraps it up on laying the groundwork, what we here at Elm Builders do. And so we just want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.